We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the centre of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 8th of September 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, Japan's Prime Minister resigns, opening the way for a new leader. But with a fractured government and the rise of the populist voice, what does his successor inherit? Also ahead in the next 60 minutes.
If this election has taught us one thing, it is surely to expect the unexpected, thanks to Mr. Stoltenberg's sudden return.
Norway votes in its parliamentary elections, but with an agenda dominated by real wars and tariff wars, we ask how much room is left for domestic issues. Plus,
we have multiple wars happening, and what will be the best way to bridge and be a convener is something that we want to continue doing.
After speaking at this year's Quality of Life conference in Barcelona, we hear from the UAE's Minister of State about her nation's role in peacekeeping. Plus, reports from Watches and Wonders Geneva, a look at Monday's newspapers and the fashion news too. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at some of the other stories that are happening in the news. The French government could fall yet again today after a confidence vote in the National Assembly, which the Prime Minister François Bayrou looks certain to lose. The South Korean Foreign Minister is to travel to the United States to secure the return of hundreds of Korean workers detained in an immigration raid on a car battery plant in the state of Georgia. And a woman who killed several members of her family by serving them a meal with poisonous mushrooms has been sentenced to life in jail. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, in the end, Shigeru Ishiba was true to his promise. He successfully negotiated a comprehensive trade deal with the United States, including a 15% tariff on Japanese automotive imports. And then just days after its announcement, he stepped down.
I have decided to resign from my position as president of the Liberal Democratic Party. I have stated that I would make this decision at proper time after completing what needed to be done. I have also stated that the responsibility for the election results lies with me as the party president. Now that we have completed one phase of negotiations regarding US tariff measures, I believe this is exactly that proper timing I mentioned. Given this situation, I have decided to step aside for the next leader.
Well, he joined a growing list of Japanese prime ministers whose tenures seem to run out of road around the 1-year mark. Ishiba's was a little over 11 months. But since his government lost its majority in July, it was more a question of when, not if, he would go. Well, to explain all, I'm joined now from our Tokyo studio by Fiona Wilson, Monocle's Tokyo Bureau Chief and Senior Asia Editor. Very good afternoon to you, Fiona.
Hi, Emma.
Is anybody greatly surprised by this? There is an indication that he jumped rather than was pushed.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened. I mean, he was facing today it was kind of a no confidence vote against him. It was really, the writing was on the wall. Basically, within the LDP, within the party, increasing numbers of MPs were saying he needs to go. And that number needed to get to about 172. It had already got to 161. And it could have been quite an embarrassing day and very divisive for the party. So to avoid that, this is the thinking. I mean, we have to read between the lines here. I think to avoid that embarrassment, he stepped down. And I think people were already wondering on Saturday night, Shigeru Koizumi, definitely one of the contenders, agriculture minister. He went in to talk to Ishiba, and so did the vice president of the party, Yoshihide Suga, who has himself been a prime minister. And they went in to talk to him. And I think a lot of people felt that their advice was exactly as you say, jump before you're pushed.
What was it that had caused so much dissatisfaction with Ishiba?
Well, I mean, there are many issues with the party itself, and Ishiba did mention that yesterday. He said there is no future for this party unless reform happens. But aside from all that, you just have to look at the elections. He's only been in power for 11 months. He's lost the majority in both the upper and lower house now. So he had an election shortly after he was voted in by the party. He had a snap election. Really, it was meant to cement his position. He ended up losing the LDP's majority in the lower house. Absolutely disastrous. So he's been running a minority government. He then compounded that pain in July. There was an upper house election. And again, the LDP Komeito coalition lost its majority. So it's a very weak position. And at that point in July, this is when things really turned. He himself said, look, I will look and see when the time is right and step aside. And finally, I think many people in the party felt, finally he decided that once this agreement had been reached with the US on Friday, it was time to go.
Because this was the second part of an agreement, wasn't it? That it was that he had negotiated a 15% tariff deal with the United States. But the big sticking point had been the automotive industry, which Japan finds so important when it comes to exports to the US.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely critical for the Japanese economy. It's a huge export market, America, for everything from Japan, but cars particularly. And they were really looking at a lot of pain. I mean, it was 27.5%, the tariff. It was enormous. So to get it down to 15, that will still hurt these smaller car makers. But, the Toyotas of this world can probably survive that. But no, it's been a really difficult ride. And I think, once that had been signed, I think that really, it was becoming clearer that Ishiba would finally move on.
Fiona, we live in a world where there is an awful lot of unstable governments, but this is quite an unusual and unexpected era for Japan, isn't it?
Well, I mean, actually, traditionally, Japan has famously this bit of a revolving door of prime ministers who don't last very long. The system's pretty robust, and basically the LDP is just always in charge. So it's a case of who's running the LDP. The bottom line is that the LDP is in charge. Now, that position is shifting. You mentioned this rise of populism. They're not doing as well. They've lost the majority, as I mentioned, in both houses. Now, whoever takes over, it's not a great position to be starting from. You are going to try and run a minority government, which means every decision you make, you have to negotiate with the opposition. And the opposition is not that interested in negotiating with the LDP. And as a party, he said there is no future unless we reform. And he compared it sort of disbanding the party and kind of putting it back together. I think he felt really it needs to be reformed. We're talking root and branch reform here. Now, whether everyone is up for that is difficult. I don't know. But the party that is facing a leadership election now is very different from the one that took that Ishiba won the election to lead last year. You've got fewer members in the Diet. The factional system, this famous factional system, which really controlled what happened, has been broken apart. So it's a very, very different picture now and a little bit unpredictable as well.
And indeed, yesterday, Ishiba said if the LDP, his party remains the same without any change, there will be no tomorrow for the party if that is how people see us. There is a call, obviously, there from a departing Prime Minister that his successor needs more than just to keep holding the reins and keeping a steady hand on the Japanese tiller as a country, but will need to absolutely, really dive in deep and work out what the future of their own party is going to be.
Yeah, I think, the LDP was beset with these various scandals, funding scandals. You had the Unification Church, which was obviously a huge problem. The fund, they were taking funds from the Unification Church very controversially. They tried to lose all those, shed those problems, but they just haven't done it, I don't think. And what happened with the upper house election in July is that suddenly these very small opposition parties really did quite well unexpectedly. Now, this raises the question, can those opposition parties come together? Can they coalesce enough to nominate a leader? And I doubt it at the moment. It's an absolute problem for the opposition in Japan. They can't come together. Their positions are very different. And this is where you find the LDP regardless of being a minority government, seems to survive.
And indeed, so let's talk about the successors. Who is going to be likely to... Who are the runners and riders now?
Well, actually, the only person who's put his name in the ring is Toshimitsu Motegi. He's an absolute heavyweight. He's been a foreign minister. He's been economy minister. He has put his hat in the ring. But I don't know if he's really going to do it. I mean, I don't think he would have enough support. The front runners are absolutely Sanae Takaichi, who is a rather right-wing, centre-right character. She came second to Ishiba last year, and I feel like she could just about do it this time. It slightly depends on how the election is run, and that's not yet decided. It's really, to me, it seems to be between her and Shigeru Koizumi, who's absolutely the other end of the spectrum. He's mid-40s. He's an attractive person. He's not necessarily that experienced, but the public seems to like him. And when they're polling, these two come out on top, and they are very, very different. Koizumi is he's a more relaxed figure. Takaichi is much more on the right of the party. So it really is going to be if either of those two win, it's going to be a very, very different scenario. But you've also got, people like Yoshimasa Hayashi. He's the chief cabinet secretary. He's an absolutely solid voice. He's the top spokesman for the government at the moment. So he's also a possibility. And I think those are the names that you'd be looking at. But if you're looking at the polls, Takaichi currently just nudging ahead of Shigeru Koizumi.
And the to-do list that they will have when they arrive in office, they can be contented with the fact that the predecessor will have negotiated the trade deal with the United States. That puts things on a much more even footing. But we talked about the domestic problems, or the international. We have two sets of problems, don't we? We have domestic and international. Domestic is an economy that really does need to be pushed harder and harder and harder. But also internationally, when we just looked at what happened last week in China, when we saw parades, it was an enormous gesture by the Chinese to say that they are the key regional player here. And so Japan needs to find its space internationally again, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, Emma. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head there. There are two things going on here: the domestic agenda, which is extremely tough at the moment, and this international position. Now, actually, Ishiba mentioned what happened with that parade of Chinese weaponry, and he pointed out that he said Japan really needs to take charge of its defence. It needs to take control of its own defence. But his list of things that he felt that his successor needed to take over, it's quite a long shopping list. One of his big things is increasing wages. I mean, we've talked about this many times, haven't we, you and I, about prices have gone up in Japan, wages haven't gone up enough. So there's this gap. People are feeling the pain. Agricultural reform is another issue. So there's defence, and natural disaster is another thing that Prime Minister Ishiba was talking about. It's really a long list. And even with, President Trump, I mean, the Prime Minister said, look, Trump is very tough even on his allies. So whoever comes in is going to have to face Donald Trump. It's not going to be an easy ride. I think it's very challenging. And then before you even start on China and North Korea on Japan's doorstep, it's a difficult moment for Japan.
Fiona, briefly, what else are you looking at today in the Tokyo Bureau?
Well, we've just had a visit, a completely different, excuse me, but very different subject. We've just had a visit from the director of Tokyo Gendai, which is this, is trying to pitch itself as Japan's most important contemporary art fair. And that's another very interesting side, the soft power of Japan. Can it sort of reveal itself beyond animation, as everybody knows about? But I think there's a feeling that the contemporary art market here could definitely do with some beefing up. And they're doing this big fair here next weekend. It's at Pacifico Yokohama, and it considers itself to be the sort of premier art fair. So we've just had Eri Takane in to talk about that. So I'm looking forward to seeing that at the weekend.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Fiona Wilson, Monocle's Tokyo Bureau Chief and Senior Asia Editor, thank you for joining us on the line from Japan. You're listening to The Globalist. Now, Norway concludes voting today in the country's parliamentary elections, and the agenda has been dominated, as is the case in most of the world, by three issues: war, Donald Trump's tariffs, and the rise of smaller populist parties. Monocle's Xander Brett explains.
Norway doesn't hold snap general elections. Its citizens, therefore, will be going to the ballot box almost exactly 4 years after they last cast a vote. 2021's election ended 2 terms of a Conservative-led government. It ushered in the tenure of incumbent Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre, whose Labour Party 4 years later sits top of the opinion polls. Labour's elevation to that spot has, though, been both swift and relatively unforeseen. Having slumped soon after the last election, they'd spend years below the Conservatives, led by former Prime Minister Ernest Solberg, and latterly the populist Progress Party, in opinion polling. Things changed when, towards the start of this year, a disagreement over energy policies saw Labour's centre party coalition partners pull out. They left Norway with its first single-party government for decades, but Labour support having taken another plunge, support soon soared with the return of a certain Jens Stoltenberg, former Prime Minister and, until the back end of last year, NATO's Secretary-General. He was drafted in as a replacement finance minister.
Jens Stoltenberg was the finance minister when the first dollar entered that fund, so he is a safe hand to have as a finance minister today. What do you say?
No, and as you said, Mr. Prime Minister, we are ready to sit down with the US to also work with them on if they want to establish a sovereign wealth fund, because we have a good experience with our fund.
Kjetil B. Alstadheim is the political editor of Aftenposten, one of Norway's largest daily newspapers, and Stoltenberg's return took him and many off guard.
It was a real surprise for me and for many, and a boost for the Labour Party, no doubt about that.
Stoltenberg, though, can't claim all credit for a sudden reversal in Labour Party fortunes. To a certain extent, he shares it with President Trump.
Why did you invite Norway so soon to the White House?
Because I like them. And I like your Prime Minister, and I like the way your government runs, and I respect the King. He's highly respected in Norway. It's a great thing, not an easy thing to do.
Peter Eger Langsetter is a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Oslo's Department of Political Science.
January, February is when the popularity rise happened, and the uncertainty Trump introduced to security policies and foreign policies benefited Labour, who are seen as competent in these matters.
But as Kjetil Alstadheim explains, money also had a hand.
In the years before, they were hit by a series of crises. A spike in energy, in electricity prices, general inflation, 14 rate hikes, the war in Ukraine. But now we see it's a change in sentiment with the consumers, with the families. They have had an increase in wages that exceeds the inflation rate. So there's a rising optimism now in this election year, which is perfect timing for a governing party.
Inevitably, as one party soared, another slumped. The victims, the Conservatives, who a few months ago were replaced as poll toppers by the Progress Party. That, though, of course, was before Labour's dramatic rise overtook them both. Peter Langsetter again.
So in the previous two campaigns, a lot of the campaigns were about immigration policies and climate policies, whereas in this campaign, it's really been about foreign policies and economic policies. So basically security, right, in different aspects of security, whether it's about security for your individuals and households' finances, or it's about security for Norway, increased spending on defense and so on. Even the populist right Progress Party, which usually talks a lot about immigration, they now just mention it, when they talk about tax cuts, they just say, we could fund the tax cuts by not spending as much on immigration and foreign aid and so on, and climate policies.
If this election has taught us one thing, it is surely to expect the unexpected, thanks to Mr. Stoltenberg's sudden return. And I guess when it comes to the prospect of another stint of Stoltenberg as Prime Minister, well, we should never say never. Much more likely, though, is that Støre will continue in that post. That said, simply emerging as head of the largest party in Parliament is no guarantee of continuing in the top job. He may lead a single-party government now, but he might need coalition partners post-election, and that's something that depends on the fortunes of smaller rivals. Norway's Parliament, the Storting, has 169 MPs. To qualify for a cut of those seats, though, parties must have met a 4% threshold. Kjetil Alstadheim.
If Labour they keep the majority, they will continue alone. And also it will be probably a more complicated parliament to maneuver in, because now they need the Socialist Left Party and the Centre Party to get a majority for the budget, for example. But probably they will also need the Red Party and maybe the Greens. And then I think it will be better for them to be alone and kind of show what we will have as a Labour government, and then we can negotiate and do some compromises in the parliament.
Norway might be perched towards the top of the globe, but that doesn't remove it from currents further south. Trump, not to mention two ongoing major conflicts abroad in Gaza and Ukraine, and Russia, remember, shares a short border with Norway, have all helped shape discussions as Norwegians, right on time, make their trips to the polling booths.
And that was Zander Brett reporting for us there. Still to come on today's programme, how the UAE is shaping the Middle East politics. We'll hear from its Minister of State, who joined us at our Quality of Life conference in Barcelona. So stay tuned to The Globalist.
Each of us has a craft, a calling that inspires us. Whether it's how a coffee is brewed, a chair is built, or how money is looked after. There's a love for the work, a care that compels you forward. For us at UBS, it's about designing a unique outcome for you. Because whatever your craft may be, ours is built around helping you succeed. UBS, banking is our craft.
7:20 here in London. Let's continue with today's newspapers. I'm delighted to say that fresh from a mini break in Budapest, Vincent McAviney, political broadcaster, commentator, and just out of the spa.
Good morning.
How are you feeling? You're feeling
very
rested
relaxed,
and refreshed.
Very rested, yeah.
There is a lot to be said for a spa town. Right, let's find out what you've now come back and picked up the papers for us. We're immensely grateful for that, Vinny. So tell us what you spotted.
Well, a lot going on, and did have to keep an eye across this at the weekend. We have a new reshuffled British government here. Sir Keir Starmer was sort of forced into pulling the trigger on this because the resignation of Angela Rayner, who was his deputy prime minister and housing secretary, after problems with her own purchase of a home. And so he's done a sort of quite big reshuffle, being described by the Times as Blairites taking control of growth in the cabinet. The Guardian also saying that Labour figures are urging him to stop making mistakes. It's pretty normal for British governments after a year to do this kind of reshuffle. A lot of people had been in the position that they were in opposition in the sort of shadow cabinet, and if they don't sort of deliver in the first year, it's time for a shake-up. But this is a little bit bigger than people expected. It's quite close to party conference, which will mean that people only have a short amount of time to get on top of their briefs before they're going to have to face the public in one of their big set-piece events of the year. And there have been some winners and losers as well.
One of the interesting things that the introduction of a more Blairite approach is that I think one of the great criticisms that has been of the Labour Party and the Labour government so far is that it had an awful lot of time in opposition. And when it got into power, there was an expectation that the government would have a vision akin to Tony Blair when he got into power in 1997. And yet that vision did not come. And now a year on, people are saying stop making mistakes and this, that and the other. So is there a sense that bringing Blairites in or actually referencing Tony Blair is actually an effort to try to add a little bit of coherence and a bit of purpose to the government?
I think that's right. That on that point, that's very valid. I think they had a lot of time in opposition. Keir Starmer himself had 5 years of leader. He had to do a lot of back office fixing after the Corbyn years and the sort of damage that was done. But then they thought in Sue Gray, who was this sort of civil servant that was running his office, that they had someone who really understood where the levers and the buttons were. That wasn't the case, and she went very quickly. And now they're sort of having to make up for time. I think what's interesting about this whole idea of Blairites is there has been a calcification in the sort of Blair tribe that in their first 2 years in government in 1997, they actually played it too safe. And yes, they went on to win 2 more elections and they did a lot. But in those first 2 years, they were a bit scared. They hadn't been in government for a long time and they weren't bold enough, which is, if the public has changed government like it has done from 13 years of Conservatives or 14 years into Labour, people are expecting you at least to be bold, to do things, to grasp the nettle. That's something that Angela Rayner actually was doing when it came to employment law in the country. But I think they're wanting to see more of that. Otherwise, they just feel it's more of the same.
How much of a hangover do you think the departure of Angela Rayner will make? I mean, because the fact is that the handwritten letter by Keir Starmer, the sense that, that idea that he told her in the letter that he was going to ensure that her legacy would live on, even though they'd only been for a year. How poisonous will that be for a government which does need to make a clean break when it comes to scandal and misbehaviour? Because that was one of the few great promises that they made.
I actually will say that I think she might be seen to be, in a little bit of time, to have not done as bad as people thought, and that she might come back because she was a highly effective communicator. And I would point to the likes of tax in our system is incredibly complicated, and you can ask tax lawyers for advice on the same situation and they'll point to different parts of the code. The code is books and books long. And I think more people will be curious as well about what Nigel Farage has done. He is now an MP in a place called Clacton-on-Sea. He promised voters that he'd buy a house there. Turns out he hasn't bought a house there. He's got his girlfriend to buy the house there to avoid having to pay second home stamp duty. So there are all kinds of quirks in the system, but on the basis of what Angela Rayner has explained, she should have paid more, but she wasn't trying to go out of her way not to pay more. She was seeking advice, but she didn't get the right advice. But she had a duty to make sure it was the best advice possible and didn't do that. So I think maybe on the way that she has handled this and the fact she's a very strong communicator, at some point she may come back in.
And internationally, the UK government is where it seems to be much stronger internationally than it is domestically, which is the case practically for everybody, isn't it?
Completely. I mean, same with Macron as well. Of course, there is that dividing line. I think Keir Starmer has felt much more comfortable on the international stage, but there's also been a sort of bit of a hug of warm embrace on the international stage of, oh, Britain is a reliable partner again. Here is a country that wants to be outward facing. They want investment. They want to re-engage with Europe. And so he's slightly been rewarded for that. And I think you're going to see, with the sort of end of Emmanuel Macron's time now sort of really getting underway, that Keir Starmer sort of emerges as the sort of bigger leader in Europe, even though he's not an EU leader.
Let's move on to a story that we've had in the headlines and will run today. We have the South Korean foreign minister on their way to Washington to secure the release of a group of Korean workers who've been accused of working illegally in Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, this is hundreds of people. It's really fascinating. The New York Times has got a good piece about it, about this car plant in Georgia that was a partnership between Hyundai and LG. And this raid took place. Nearly 500 workers, many of them South Korean citizens, were arrested. What's really fascinating is we still don't have a clear read of why they took this decision, why now, and what the immigration status of these people were. And, it's going to have, and as being reported by the New York Times, a huge chilling effect in Asia when it comes to the investment. South Korea was the biggest investor in the United States in 2023. For them, it's a huge military geostrategic partnership, but it's a huge business partnership as well. And if you are a sort of Asian company now and you're pumping money into the States because your government's telling you to do this to help sort of reduce their tariff amounts, and you're trying to get your workers in at the same time as they're sort of frustrating who can come into the country. If America wants to onshore production, you've got to build these factories. You're building them quick. You need people from your company in your homeland to go and do this. And if you're making it hard for them to get into the country, then you're going to maybe end up in situations like this. This could have been a warning shot to other countries to make sure you get your paperwork in line. But it's going to be really fascinating to see whether this sort of erupts into sort of quite verbal tensions.
It's an interesting and very easy hit. If you are trying to, if you're sort of subscribing to MAGA and you want to make sure that America is made great again, if you have a mass arrest of workers from ostensibly a friendly country, it's a very, very good way of sort of peddling the immigration ticket easily, isn't it?
It is. And I think if you're a company doing this, you might need to do a bit more explaining to the local population and say, look, we're trying to build this plant quickly. To build the plant, we need expectations from, the expertise from our staff in Korea. But then we're going to start hiring you to operate the plant. But we've got to have some people here. Maybe that's what's gone wrong here. But there does seem to be questions around this plant. 3 people have died in it over the last 3 years. Questions about the practices, whether or not they were obeying local labour laws. Obviously, auto industry is sort of heavily unionised in the United States. So it'll be interesting to see what exactly was going on, whether they did, which seems crazy for, this is a major major company, Hyundai and LG, you wouldn't think that they would be the kind of company that would gamble on just smuggling in workers to the United States. They would have gone through some kind of process to get them visas of some kind, whether they were the right kind or not. So, if you were the South Korean government, you would be demanding answers from Hyundai as to what they were doing to get these workers in. And if it was on the up and up, you'd be saying to the United States, well, what are you doing?
Finally, the Wall Street Journal has got the most burning question of the day. Has everybody got their bucket hat?
Yes.
What is a bucket? For those of us who are not, I'm from Manchester, so I was born with wearing one. But for those of us who don't know what a bucket hat is, why is the Wall Street Journal writing about it, and why is it so important?
So a bucket hat is basically a hat which has a rounded peak all the way around it. They were big in the 90s. And the reason for their comeback is tied to Oasis having a reunion. So the sort of iconic Britpop band, they were often seen sporting bucket hats in the 90s. So much so that Adidas has done a partnership with them to sort of make official bucket hats and other wear for this reunion concert series. It's obviously a really big money spinner for acts these days to have official merch. Any tour I've been to recently, whether it was the Beyonce tour this summer, she'd done a partnership with Levi's, and people were turning up in sort of Beyonce country western Levi's wear. Taylor Swift last year, you had lots of bits of clothing that became associated with that. Harry Styles has his feather boas, but this is the bucket hat. And I think what's really interesting is we've seen all their concerts, tons and tons of people turning up. I wonder if this is a little bit as well about the demographic, the age of their male fans. A lot of them thinning hairlines, if they still have some, and maybe the bucket hat is to help them out in the sunshine. What
I find amazing about the whole Oasis style thing is that when you go to Manchester Piccadilly Station, there are enormous pictures of Liam Gallagher being the frontman of Oasis, being the poster boy for Berghaus and the bucket hat. And the fact is that the 1990s made pretty, dare I say, unattractive functional clothes. Suddenly something that we all aspire to. And I found myself thinking, I need to get my Berghaus out. Usually reserved for reporting from windy locations.
Yes.
Vincent McAviney, political broadcaster and commentator, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. You're listening to The Globalist. A quick look now at some of the other stories we're following today. The French government could fall yet again after a confidence vote later in the National Assembly, which the Prime Minister François Bayrou looks certain to lose. He's France's fourth Prime Minister in 18 months. The South Korean foreign minister is to travel to the United States to try to secure the return of hundreds of Korean workers detained in an immigration raid on a car battery plant in the state of Georgia. US officials say many of the workers were there illegally. The US Treasury Secretary says Washington is prepared to increase pressure on Russia following this weekend's attacks on Ukraine. But the US warned that it needs European help and also to impose tougher tariffs on countries buying oil from Moscow. And a woman who killed several members of her family by serving them a meal with poisonous mushrooms has been sentenced to life imprisonment. A judge in Melbourne said Erin Patterson, who's 50, wouldn't be eligible for parole for 33 years. He said she had shown no remorse for her crimes. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. It's 3:32 a.m. in Buenos Aires, 8:32 a.m. if you're listening in Zurich. Now, having been pelted by bricks while out canvassing last week, the Argentinian president Javier Milei should have been prepared for a similar thumping, although metaphorical, in the country's local elections. Well, it is indeed exactly what happened, with his party beaten in the biggest province of Buenos Aires. So to tell us more, I'm joined in the studio by Antonio Sampaio, who's an expert on Latin American politics and security. Welcome back. Good morning, Antonio.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us. Right. Let's look at Buenos Aires. This is home to 40% of Argentina's voting population. It was no great surprise that Milei's party would get a thumping, but it was a thorough thumping.
It was quite thorough, and it was more or less as the markets, especially, and some analysts expected on Friday, when the markets, showed a lot of volatility and investors were very jittery, because it's all about the price for Javier Milei's austerity measures, which have been behind the very positive results that he has achieved in the economy. And getting positive results in the economy in Argentina is quite a feat. The inflation has been enormously cut back from almost 30% to a little over 2%. So that's quite an achievement. But behind those achievements has been a wave of austerity measures. Unemployment is up. Public construction has been stalled. A lot of cuts to social spending. So it was a test of whether those austerity measures were going to be sustainable. And the voters in Buenos Aires, which, as you said, is a very, very important barometer for the country, have very thoroughly rejected those, at least to some extent, those measures.
And what has been reaction to this? Has it been a sense that he will actually reform? Because one gets the impression that he's not someone who goes back quietly. But actually, is he going to double down on his projects?
His speech after the results were announced was quite interesting because he started by, and a big part of his speech was about admitting political mistakes and said, we will correct them and we have to admit responsibility for that. And towards the end of the speech, he said, however, the model will remain the same and we are not going to change any of the main measures. So he is in a tough position right now because he can't signal retreat from his economic measures, or he will risk losing everything that he has achieved over the past 2 years in terms of the economy, and the investors are going to be even more jittery. But at the same time, politically, the population is already quite fed up with his measures. So it is a very tough position.
I mean, has he lost the room more generally, given the fact that there has been the further complication of corruption allegations, not against him personally, but explain what's gone wrong with his sister?
Yeah, so his sister and also a very important government figure, there's been a scandal in which a local news outlet has published a recording of the head of the country's disability agency, the agency that takes care of disabled population, in which he seems to say that Milei's sister is taking a 3% kickback on some purchases of that agency. And that is made especially harsh for the Argentinians to swallow because Milei's government has been cutting down a lot on social spending, including disability, social support for disabled people and other types of social support. So that is a very, very complicated situation. Milei has denied the accusations, and it is just a recording which, it seems to imply that she did that, but it has cost him quite a bit, I think, in this election.
Indeed, because this was one of the great tickets he was being elected on, which was he was going to try to root out corruption in Argentina. So what happens next? We have a country which is no less divided politically. We have a country which, although it enjoys a budget surplus, pain is being felt by a large amount of the population. So where are the next moves for everybody here?
So the larger test for Milei will be in October when the country has legislative elections for the national legislature. That is... I can't see how he will change the political mood in the country very drastically until then. He will continue to dance this dance of saying that he will change and perhaps soften his approach, especially towards social spending, while signaling for investors that he is tough and he will remain on the path of austerity.
Finally, there is talk that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, is on his way to Buenos Aires at some point this week. This has not been confirmed, but that cements a relationship which places Argentina in a very sort of specific place in history, doesn't it, to ally with Israel at the moment?
Yes, indeed. And experts, political pundits, lots of journalists in Argentina, they're all sort of puzzled over why really Milei is allying so strongly and so definitely with Israel. It seems to be a genuine ideological alignment that he has, and he's even signaled that he might convert to Judaism. And I think it's a broader alignment with a global sort of right-wing movement of support to Argentina, and is also signal to his, I think, main political model, who is Donald Trump.
And this is a difficult situation as well for Argentina, given the fact that the ICC has an arrest warrant out for Netanyahu, accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity in Palestine. That makes it really tricky for Argentina, doesn't it?
It does, and there have been prominent judges in Argentina who have already filed requests for his arrest, citing the ICC ruling. There is also talk that the Netanyahu and Milei will meet instead in New York during the UN General Assembly, and I think that's a big part. This sort of looming arrest is part of the reason why Netanyahu hasn't confirmed yet his visit.
Antonio Sampaio, expert on Latin American politics and security, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. You're listening to Monocle Radio.
IQ, EQ, and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS. Banking is our craft.
A look now at one of the highlights from last Friday's Monocle Quality of Life conference in Barcelona. One of the speakers was Her Excellency Noura bint Mohammed Al Kabi, who's a Minister of State at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the United Arab Emirates. She spoke to Ed Stocker about the UAE's role in the world and began by discussing the origins of her own diplomatic demeanour.
I think I'm just like that. But, childhood wasn't that quiet. So I think this comes with age and comes with trying to listen more and interact with people. I mean, since a young age, we've been traveling a lot, meeting people, listening to stories, reading. So maybe that is also part of the culture that you grow up with. But of course, as a diplomat, you need also to maintain a level of calm, whatever the situation is, and try your best to be the message barrier than the person who is blocking certain conversations.
You're Minister of State in the UAE's Foreign Affairs Ministry. You've worked, as you said before during the panel, you've worked in energy, you've worked for the Culture Ministry as well. Did you always know that you wanted to be a diplomat? Did you always know that you wanted to be involved in foreign affairs, given that you did other things before?
Well, I think in my previous jobs, whether it's the Ministry of Culture, Parliament work, even media work, there was always the element of, being in different countries and representing your country for the work, for building relationships. So that diplomacy line was kind of more of a subtle one, not out there in a job title, but being part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I give credit to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who saw that it's really important to build a team that is not just looking at the political theme of things, but the public diplomacy, the story theme, the energy theme, the sustainability theme, the technology, the AI, and the health theme. So a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it will always, handle political situations. And I believe that is a classic. But we're living in an age right now that AI can be part of a political talk. Microchips can be a part of a political talk. Health, vaccination, everything. So having a team that looks into that perspective, a nation to nation, the multilateralism, the group of people who can work together, I think that is crucial at such times.
I'm going to put you on the spot. What is the biggest misconception you think, as you travel the world, about the UAE?
The biggest one? Everyone is rich. Everyone is a millionaire or a billionaire. It's it's kind of a bling situation. I think that is currently them.
Seeing the glitter of the U.
And I thought about it because it was different back in the 90s. The UAE is just a desert. Now that is the stereotype that is, I feel and I sense more.
And how much do you think the UAE can help the world in the sense that being a player that listens to more than one side, getting involved, and I'm talking diplomacy-wise, in conflicts? How important do you think that role is, and do you think it's growing?
I think the UAE can help with others as well. The UAE can't only help the world and what's going on right now. So we do have like-minded nations, like-minded leaders who, believe in the ethos that we believe in. Going back to the point of, having a conversation, building bridges, let's try our best that this is not a zero-sum game. And yes, we do have our differences. And as you can see, currently we have multiple wars happening, whether it's from economic trade wars, physical wars, and what will be the best way to bridge and be a convener is something that we want to continue doing and do our best also to see people or leaders or countries that can be part of this group.
That was the UAE's Minister of State, Her Excellency Noura bint Mohammed Al Kabi, in conversation with Monocle's Ed Stocker at our Quality of Life conference in Barcelona. You're listening to The Globalist. Let's stay with last week's Quality of Life conference in Barcelona and an update on fashion news as well. I'm joined now by our fashion director, Natalie Theodosi. After a couple of days of travels back in London, right? Happy to be home?
Very happy to be home, but we had an amazing time. As I think you've already heard that the panel talks and all the speakers, Emma, were incredible. They left us with a lot of things to think about.
Indeed, and there were human towers as well. We'll come to that in a minute. That wasn't to do with fashion. You were doing a couple of the panels in Barcelona. Talk us through them.
Yes, so I spoke to Adriana Dominguez, who is the CEO of Adolfo Dominguez, one of Spain's most known and contemporary labels. And it was really fascinating to hear her story. She's the daughter of the founder, and she's taken the business, revived it, and really created an incredible global brand, while still being very true to her Galician roots and producing there. What I loved is she spoke about, they offer clothes that are quite accessibly priced, yet she's still kind of quite determined in operating like a luxury brand. And giving designers room to design collections from scratch, to work with artists, to have this agora, she called them, sessions, which are creative sessions where they all go away and meet with other creatives and artists and design the collections every season. So it was interesting. Spain is really important on the high street, and we speak a lot about Inditex and Mango, but I think Adolfo Dominguez is really a force to be reckoned with, and they have huge business in Japan, in Mexico, and more in Europe outside of Spain as well. So I would say that was a real highlight that started us off.
Indeed, it's an interesting position that Adolfo Dominguez represents, because in so many places they are not known. As you say, Inditex and Zara sort of sit, and Massimo Dutti sit across this market. But there is something rather sharp about Adolfo Dominguez. It's got a very, very crisp and clean sense of design to it that arguably would travel much further than it does at the moment.
Exactly. And going into their stores in Barcelona, the product is very good quality. It's reasonably priced, especially in this current market where prices have shot up like crazy. And it's a really nice experience. They really do see themselves as a luxury brand and invest in the stores and the quality. So I would definitely recommend it as a well-priced quality alternative to either the high street or the premium luxury market.
And again, this was something that bore out in a couple of the other the talks that you were doing, that idea of the accessibility yet designed as luxury, even to the point when we're talking about hospitality and the fact that if you have a well-designed uniform, then your staff feel better and they work better and the company functions better. And this was something that you were talking about in Barcelona.
Exactly. Very different type of company. This is to young designers. They've spent a few years working in design studios of the more traditional fashion brands and realized quite quickly that the system isn't working, it's too fast, it's not healthy. And they created something very different. They have a beautiful studio just outside Barcelona, and they created a permanent collection of uniforms, mainly for hospitality, for restaurants. They're also starting to work with museums. But they've been also speaking about similar things, which is honoring Spanish craft traditions, making things slowly, and creating product that lasts. So yes, two very different companies, but quite similar themes for sure.
Let's move on to what you did in Milan and the fact that Milan now is in a sort of a state of mourning for Giorgio Armani, who died last week.
Yeah, so that news broke last week as we were in the conference. And of course, it's so sad to see, especially because in 2 weeks' time, and Giorgio Armani was supposed to have this big celebration during Milan Fashion Week for his brand's 50th anniversary. I think that show will still go on, but it will be a very different atmosphere. And since then, I think everyone has been just looking back at his life, at everything that he has created, and of course, also talking about succession and what's going to happen, which I think is a little bit too early to jump into those discussions. But I'm sure in due time, we are going to see a very well laid out plan that he left for his company.
It's quite funny you say that, because this is the one question that actually has been asked for a very long time, given the fact that Signor Armani was 91 when he died and yet was not taking his hand off the tiller for 1 second. But there was always that sense that there was always Leo Dell'Orco in the background. But the fact was that he would always turn up. If he was representing Mr. Armani, or indeed if he was with him, they would look identical. So there was a sense that succession was a very, very exacting process.
Yes, definitely. He never wanted to talk about succession, especially when it came to the creative direction and designing the collections. But like you said, there is Leo Dell'Orco, and there is a team that has been working for him for decades. And I'm sure he trained in such a meticulous way because he was so precise. He has such a singular vision that I'm sure he left them more than capable to be able to carry the brand through. Of course, after a while, there will be the need for a creative director with their own vision to come in and keep the brand going. But my guess is that we won't see that for a while.
Finally, talk to us a little bit about what Monocle on Fashion and what you're up to at the minute. We have new radio programmes and exciting new interviews to look forward to.
Yes, so we took a little bit of a summer break in true Mediterranean fashion, but now we're back, and the show is relaunching tonight at 8 p.m. with an exclusive interview with the CEO of My Teresa, Michael Klieger. He was also part of our guests in season 1, and he was so popular. So I thought it would be interesting to do a part 2 and speak now about the acquisition of Net-a-Porter by My Teresa. The deal has finished, and he's now CEO of the newly formed group Lux Experience that includes both retailers now. And he spoke to us about what he really plans to do with those companies and how he's going to differentiate them, because a lot in the industry were wondering whether we'll see one go. But he's talking us about our strategy, something that he hasn't done before. So it's an interesting conversation about retail. And it comes at a time when there's so much question marks about the wholesale business, about how it can survive, what's next. And he's someone who managed to defy the odds and build profitable businesses. So it's a very interesting one, and I hope everyone will tune in tonight.
We will indeed. Natalie Theodosi, Monocle's fashion director, thank you so much for that update. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. We end today's programme with a report from This Is Watches and Wonders Geneva, and fresh off the plane.
Hi.
Joined in the studio. That's Brenda Toohey, everybody. That's Monocle's luxury markets editor. How are you looking? It looks like the watches took that. You look glorious, right? Okay, you look fine. But you did come in and just sort of pointed slightly, saying, I'm a little bit tired.
A little bit tired, yeah, just a tiny bit. Well, Geneva was super busy. I mean, I got off the flight and it was so hot there. I thought, this is all wrong. It was supposed to be, 80% chance of rain. But within hours, the rain was torrential.
Right.
It was biblical, in fact. Honestly, I haven't seen rain like that for years. It was incredible. And nobody was really ready for that.
Because everybody would be quite well dressed. Yeah. They turned out quite well for watches and
it was
wonders.
Quite funny.
Okay. Did we say, is there any one particular moment you can possibly share with us where
just people walking around, with their trousers absolutely sopping wet and their leather-soled shoes just destroyed, really.
Yeah, that is the thing.
It was quite funny.
That is the thing. They need a bit more investment in sort of rubber-based clothing.
I think so, yeah.
Quite sure. The watches are pretty waterproof, though, so they'd have been all right.
I think they are. I mean, there were lots of wonderful things happening. I mean, Blancpain has said they're going to devote the next 6 months, well, beginning at 2026, to women, entirely to women. They are going to create a new watch, which is based on the watch that Arthur Miller gave to Marilyn Monroe. He gave her a Blancpain watch. It was an Art Deco watch from their Ladybird collection. She wore it all the time. And Blancpain are going to create a series of watches. They're in development at the moment, based on that watch, which is very, very pretty. I mean, it's quite amazing now. There is, a definite switch towards, there's a classic watch, there's a sports watch, and then there's a watch really for women. It may be a jewelry watch. It may not
more like
be
a piece of jewelry,
but yes, but finer, and for women.
It's funny because I think Blancpain did this a few years ago. I think it's in about 5 years ago. It actually had I think it made an ultra limited edition cocktail watch. Clearly, that is something that it sees that there is a future market in. So, are we all going to be wearing? We women going to be wearing watches as pieces of jewelry for the
I think that's a super trend. It really is, because we didn't have that choice for a number of years. I know a lot of my female friends invested in watches, and they went quite big. They went for big Rolexes, etc. They might have had a mother-of-pearl dial. They might have had a smattering of diamonds around them. But, the size was quite big. And now you do have the choice. You can have a little mini watch. You can have just a small watch, or you can have, a Big Bang by Hublot.
I want a cocktail watch, ladies and gentlemen.
And a cocktail,
and a cocktail to go with it. Yes, you knew what I was going to say next. All right. So with the cocktail watches and the wet trousers, I'm getting quite a look here at Geneva. What else was there? There's some are there more collaborations happening? It's a tricky world, is collaboration, because people wonder whether they're weary of them, but then someone goes and does something good.
Yeah, something sharp, something exciting. Well, this one happened quite by accident. The CEO of Zenith Watches asked USM to come in and refurb their HQ. So in they popped, and out of that, a collaboration was born. They have produced the Defy Skyline Skeleton Edition watch. It's just gorgeous. It comes, of course, in 4 fabulous colors, the yellow, the green, the blue, the orange, very USM colors as well. And USM have created a special limited edition watch box, which is quite the chunker. It's quite big. It's blue, and when you open it up, it has the orange, the yellow, and the green inside. The watches are gorgeous, really, really pretty. They're limited edition. They're just stunning. I think I'd want all of them. They're limited to 50 pieces, and they're handsome men, Mr. Zenith and Mr. USM.
I've just shown Brenda the original.
From the late 1800s,
Indeed,
yes.
We've got Georges Favre-Jacot in 1865 in doing Zenith, and then we've got 1885 USM, the Metal Workshop, also in Switzerland. And these are two men. May I just say that they're handsome fellows, aren't they?
They are. sporting, very handsome hats, yes? And a mustache, a fine mustache on each.
But not very smiley. Not they should be, because it sounds like a wonderful collaboration. Thank you very much indeed for that. Brenda Tui, Monocle's Luxury Markets Editor. That's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to Chris Chermak, our producer, Hassan Anderson and Ryumi Takahashi. Our researcher was Henry King. Our studio manager was Mariella Bevan. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday in London. The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. Join me for that if you can. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening. Have a great week.